Thank you.
Good, and you can hear me. Okay, so what I'm presenting is a collective effort. It was actually enabled by a collective intelligence tool and somewhat unsuccessfully by a little AI. It represents the input from a number of members of the School for Collective Intelligence at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco, which most of you probably don't know of. It's a relatively new university, started like about, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, but it's had enormous funding behind it and has grown enormously. It now has, well, sure, I don't know the statistics, but like many thousands of students spread over multiple campuses. The School of Collective Intelligence is about 5 years old. So it's also a new startup. As far as I know, it's the world's only department that focuses on collective intelligence. And it has both master's and PhD programs. So, and we've got about 15 professors now. These were the ones that I was able to get input from during the summer break. So I'm going to talk about the ideas that we came up with, and was basically our discussion was broken into 3 questions. One is the first 2 steps were involved in like trying to come up with the requirements, in effect, for educating for CI. So first, we talked about, what are our goals for teaching CI? Why teach it? Second is, what are our barriers? What makes teaching CI, different and uniquely challenging? And then based on those goals and barriers, we brainstormed about what possible solutions could be for achieving the goals and sort of transcending or overcoming the barriers. So that's the way we did it. So I'll just go through what I thought were hopefully the more interesting points from our discussion. First, why teach CI? And I think there's 3 main arguments why it's super critical. And those represent things you should keep in mind when you're designing teaching practices. One is, I just made up this phrase, existential utility. And I'm probably, biased and whatnot, but, it does seem to me that CI probably represents humanity's best chance at effectively addressing our many existential challenges. And basically, I think so because CI underlies success in almost every discipline we use to deal with these problems. Science, technology, and policy development, and all the rest are essentially CI activities. And so we need to develop theory and we need to channel it into effective practice as soon as possible because we want to survive as a species. Second is ethics. Is that CI probably represents our best hope for fostering more inclusive and democratic and therefore ethical decision-making processes. So the first point I made was just about utility, like trying to make the second decisions. The second point is about having decisions that are inclusive. And currently the vast majority of our populations have no practical way to influence the development of ideas that become policy and affect their lives. So there's an ethical drive to incorporate CI in decision making. And then finally, CI, I think, has potential to impact mindsets in a fairly, I don't know, significant way, let's say. We've had spectacular success with, reductionistic perspectives on how knowledge is developed. But is it still useful to view intelligence as an individual phenomenon, or to believe that human progress is the result of, a few great men? And a more systemic perspective is likely to lead us to rethink a lot of things, is my guess. And, potentially change how we do things in profound ways. So, the next question we thought about is, okay, given that CI is important, what are the unique challenges it faces that we have to grapple with if we want to, teach it well? And, I think, one that that jumps out obviously is that it's so extremely multidisciplinary. You know, economics and computer science and biology and anthropology and uh, man, I guess I could go on. And at the same time, at this stage in the field, most professors have grown up within a single discipline, as opposed to within the discipline of collective intelligence. So we notice like in our school that, still, we're teaching CI as a series of single discipline classes. A class on prediction markets, a class on the anthropology of indigenous groups in the Moroccan mountains and stuff. And there's no sort of unification of concepts or of terminology. And so kind of there's an opportunity lost for people to see how all of these are part of a coherent perspective on the world. And so, we're trying to figure out how to, deal with that. A second is just because it's a new field, we're having to make up all of our CI related teaching materials. I'm not aware of there being, for example, like a textbook. There's some collected, there's some edited books which have some articles in it, but nothing like a textbook. And finally, I guess a challenge is that, we're still just trying to figure out how to do it. In our school, we certainly experience that, all the time. And we're going through a lot of churn.
3 minutes, Mark.
3, wow. So how should we teach CI? These are some thoughts we came up with. One is that we should start with core concepts and then use them as a shared vocabulary that is then referred to in all the subsequent classes. And, I don't know what the full set would be: emergence, game theory, stuff like that. And another idea we've been working on is, certainly my experience, for example, in graduate school, is that, people taught me a lot about, how to design experiments, how to analyze stuff, how to do statistics. But the collective side of science, like, there's millions of scientists, millions of topics. How do you decide what to work on, how to work with others, how to get support for others? That was something that we learned informally. And so it's kind of like the collective intelligence side, as important as it is, was sort of a side topic you picked up on the side. We think that complex systems pedagogy probably has some interesting lessons because they faced the problem of radical multidisciplinarity. Let's see. Another thing we noticed is that, since CI is so broad, the students that we were getting are coming from, many different backgrounds and have many different aspirations. So that's made us think that we need to have the ability to provide something of a personalized path for them, because it's a big field. We can't, it will not be serving our students if we try to have like a narrow fixed curriculum for everybody, probably. Let's see. So some other quick thoughts. One thing that we're working towards is having team taught classes with profs from different disciplines. So the engagement between those multiple disciplines can occur in the class in real time. And we thought that might be really interesting for the students and potentially useful for the professors. Using CI tools to teach CI. So for example, in my class, people use technology that I've developed to work together on solving problems. And so they're learning by doing. A case study approach where we look at, existing collective intelligence systems and try to examine them from different perspectives, like from different disciplines. What kinds of concepts do they use? How successful are they at it? How can we improve them? And then the last point, and perhaps, I don't know, the most powerful, is the notion of learning by doing. So for this particular, discipline especially, we like to engage students where they're asked to collectively solve, real-world multidisciplinary problems using these principles that they're learning. And we've tried a couple of different ways. One is that, the students are developing technology. The second is that they're serving as facilitators for companies that our department connects with and helping enable collective intelligence processes. We've been trying to connect students with these kinds of people with real world problems through our alumni network. And that seems to be bearing fruit. So that's my whirlwind tour through what we talked about. I hope that made sense.
Perfect and perfect timing. Thank you so much. So wonderful to see the sorts of, to bring
Are you muted?
education really front and center back into the conversation. I'm going to actually, there is a question in the Q&A, and I might ask that first
I
because we
can't
have
hear
heard from the
anything.
panel a bit. And I don't know whether this is actually a comment or as much, but let's go with it anyways. From Vinod, subversive intelligence. Teaching CI shouldn't just be about optimistic collaboration and problem-solving big issues. Perhaps it's also about understanding how power and influence can subvert outcomes for self-serving goals. Students need to recognize, address, and balance these forces to design systems that solve problems while accounting for the dynamics of competing powers at play. Kind of almost tapping a bit to what John was saying just before that. How would you respond to that, Mark? What do you do in that front?
I cannot hear you for a couple of minutes, as I guess my headphones on it. I'm not sure.
Lost sound.
Mark, we just lost your voice.
Thanks for retyping in the chat.
Try again, Mark.
Okay, input.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
You're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So sorry, could you repeat your question briefly?
It's in the chat. It's basically saying, are you focusing too much on the optimistic? What are the sorts of things that, what about power systems, power and influence, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it should be part of our curriculum more than it is. In my own class, I focused mainly on how poorly designed CI can do a bad job. We don't seem to have much on how collective intelligence can become a force for harm in society, and whether it can have unintended consequences. So I'll make a note of that. I wonder which one of us could cover that.
Any other responses from the panel here? Sorry, I just called you John, Zach. I meant Zach. Sorry.
Just
Early
checking
morning
that
stuff.
I'm unmuted now. Margaret, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a brief comment on that one, and to thank Mark for his talk. I see a lot of overlap with what we're doing in Galway there, actually learning by doing. And in addition to the applied system science module that we run, we also have a community psychology module. And the actual focus of that is critical community psychology. And central to critical community psychology is a focus on these issues of power dynamics that can play out often in negative and coercive ways in community projects and community work. So it is quite central to that field. And it's a very important sort of consideration as part of what you might be educating in relation to understanding group dynamics. And the field of group dynamics, of course, is a very well developed field of inquiry for many decades now. And I think it's important that it feature as part of education for collective intelligence, because when students go out into the workplace settings, the professional, the community, and various different workplace settings, understanding the group dynamics that can play out, many of which, of course, can be negative, can be coercive, and can impede and have a negative impact on collective intelligence project work. It's important for them as collective intelligence practitioners and facilitators and experts to be able to navigate those types of dynamics. And it requires a kind of a parallel dimension to the curriculum and the pedagogy, even when they're working within their own teams. In the student context, they can begin to understand some of these dynamics that are playing out within their own team and so on. So it's a very important consideration for the curriculum, for sure.
Yeah, I agree very much. We have at least a couple of classes that cover that. Certainly in my class, kind of have a list of failure modes for different kinds of collective intelligence processes. Failure modes for face-to-face, failure modes for synchronous communication, failure modes for shared document updating, and they're important to understand, because if you want to engineer a good solution, you need to know what the failure modes are to detect and avoid.
100%, yeah, 100%. And it brings us back a little bit to what Zach was talking about, the issue of taking responsibility for our actions. We don't pass over responsibility to the machines. We're skeptical of one another in our interactions with one another, including the credibility of our sources of knowledge, and possible negative power dynamics that play out. And I think we need to exercise that same kind of intelligence in our interaction with machines. Of course, machines can be very useful, but we don't want to hand over responsibility to the machines to be, in essence, exercising collective intelligence on our behalf. And so there is real danger, I think, and I recognize a lot of what Zach is saying as real potential threats, particularly for young people who grow up with the machines and maybe hand over responsibility.
Mike, I'm going to do that annoying thing again and interrupt. Simon has one last question on this point, and then I think back to Mark, and then on to the next one. Apologies to everyone for cutting you off, and I know it's difficult time-wise.
Thanks, Mark. So interesting just to hear a brief report from the trenches. You really are breaking new ground there. What are you doing around assessment, right? Universities are obsessed with assessing individuals. You're focusing on assessing CI. What's that looking like at the moment for you?
Well, let's see. I mean, at the educational level, I guess we're pretty conventional. The classes have exams. In terms of assessing of the efficacy of collective intelligence tools, that's a whole different topic. Are you referring to the first or the second?
I'm referring to how we can assess individuals' ability to contribute to CI. I wondered whether you've been having a crack at anything around that. To contribute, to create it, to cultivate it. Pretty tough, I know.
Well, let's see. I'm not sure if I'm catching your drift. I mean, in my own work, we have a project on developing profiles of the people who participate in our collective intelligence platform. By observing, do they add arguments? Are they idea generators? Are they fact checkers? How's their input responded to by the others? And that could develop a surprisingly rich model of the users, so we're exploring that. Also, the other part of assessment, I've been thinking a lot about it because I'm trying to design experiments to test the things we develop. And, what we've settled on now is, basically trying to measure everything in terms of the quality of the solutions that the crowd generates.
Right.
So, how quickly do we get there? How good they are? Do they cover the Pareto front? And so that's been the gold standard for everything. So yeah, does
Okay.
that make sense?
Thanks. We'll need to draw a close there, but the whole question of assessment will hopefully come up repeatedly as we progress.